Yeah, we are now recording, so welcome everyone to our weekly call. I hope you all had a lovely weekend. Let me just see if this
Join us
works.
on Monday to hear Brent Eskridge of Infoblox discuss ARPA abuse discovery. May the 4th be with you.
Nice.
Yes, so
I
happy
love it.
Star Wars Day. I was particularly proud of that, so it seemed rude
Join
not
us
to.
on Monday to hear
Oh,
Brent Eskridge.
of course, I can't now go past it. Right. Yeah. And thank you to our sponsors, DNS for their long-term support of the call, which is very much appreciated. Yeah, as you just heard, the main topic of discussion for the call today, as described by, I'm not sure which character that was meant to be, a Jedi Knight, I guess. .arpa abuse discovery, which Brent will cover, hand over in a second. And then, depending on available time, we'll talk about some stuff that's happened over the last week or so. I'll remind you of some forthcoming events, etc. And no doubt we should have time at the end for any other business as well. So that's the plan. That's in keeping with your expectations. As I say, I was particularly proud of getting my favourite AI video tool to produce a bit of video, which was pleased me anyway. But with that in mind, Brent, you wrote a really interesting article a few weeks ago now, I guess, highlighting some problems with .arpa. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. So can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Good. All right. So thanks. As he said, my name is Brent Eskridge. I'm with Infoblox. And my name is on here, but this has really been a team project. So the actors that I'm going to be talking about, or yeah, there's more than one actor. They did a really good job of hiding what they were doing, and so it took a lot of us to kind of figure it out over numerous weeks. So I want to make sure that the rest of the team gets the credit here for it. So uh, this started in October of last year, I believe. Was working through, we have a number of automated processes, things like that, that look for indicators. And sometimes, if it doesn't necessarily meet some criteria, it'll pop up and we need to take a look. And so I started taking a look and just hit wall after wall after wall that there was something going on, but it took a while to figure it out. And that's when we started looking at spam. It was kind of when in the breakthrough. So phishing emails, I'm sure we all get them all the time. Some of them are even tests. I think earlier today I got one from Infoblox that is a test. So, they're actors are becoming quite creative in some of what they do. So here is one phishing email that we got. You can see there is a domain here. This is actually a hijacked CNAME. So, and I think it's one of our customers. And so the idea is that there's a CNAME out there points to some third-party domain that expires. The threat actor comes, registers it, and then they've got a domain they can use. And the idea is that it's leveraging the reputation of the organization that owns the domain. The interesting thing here is if you see when you actually look at the email, this is what the email looks like. It says Costco, but it's not related at all to the hijacked CNAME. And so when we say that they're abusing the reputation of the hijacked CNAME, it's not for the victim that receives the phishing email. It's the reputation as it looks to security tools, whether it's an email scanner, firewall, things like that. And so they're leveraging the good reputation of those domains to get past the defenses. The phishing lure here has nothing to do with the hijacked CNAME. And so, if you were to go to it, the idea is you're going to give it your credit card information. Um, and these are the domains that are in here. So, as I said, Imgur, things like that. It's a normal kind of phishing email where everything is embedded in HTML. Here's another one we got. Um, a similar sort of scam. These are, you complete a survey and you can get a free prize. You just have to pay shipping. And obviously, there's the rub. The difference here is when we were looking at it, this was the domain. This is, part of it here is a reverse domain name for an IP address, IPv6. And it was like, it jumped out as really weird. And we started talking and said, that shouldn't really work. What is going on? And so we're going to dive into it here in a minute. But the idea here is they're abusing the reputation as well, but abusing the reputation of ARPA because it has implicit trust. If you block .arpa, bad things happen. And so there's this implicit trust that it's going to be okay. And so it can let things, security tools just kind of give it a clean slate and go on. And so these threat actors found a way to abuse it and get past security tools because ARPA has implicit trust. So, you know, the the question is, why are they going to go, threat actors are going to go to all of this trouble? So there's been some recent studies. October, I think, of 2025 study came out. Phishing hyperlinks were the most common payload in phishing emails. So the idea is you want to take the victim off outside of the browser, where there's a lot of security tools looking for embedded attachments. 62% were using obfuscation. And so, as I mentioned, the hijack CNAMEs leverage the good reputation of a legitimate domain, but ARPA goes even farther because it has an impeccable reputation. So that's kind of the idea here. And I know I'm presenting to a DNS group, so I'm not going to explain too much of a DNS query, but I made this slide for another presentation. It's a good slide, so I'm going to keep it in here. Normal A query, it's going to go through the name servers until it gets to a domain. Pointer query, reverse DNS, it goes through a different set. But what we found is if you set it up right, you can use a reverse DNS domain in regular A queries. And so we've got some examples here of this. Spend a little bit here because this explains what the threat actors actually did. So they go to Hurricane Electric and they register for an IPv6 tunnel. So, tunneling IPv6 traffic over IPv4 network. They get an entire /64. Then what they did is they signed up for a free Cloudflare account and registered the reverse DNS as a domain to be administered under Cloudflare. It actually works. Then they go back to Hurricane Electric and say, I want to use the Cloudflare name server for this tunnel. Now, here's the tricky part. You have to create an SSL certificate for things to work. Now, normally going through Cloudflare, it doesn't like the IPv6, the ip6.arpa to create an SSL certificate. That's probably pretty good because it's not supposed to work. But there are some online tools out there that kind of allow you to backdoor in through the API to create an SSL certificate. Once you've done that, then you can configure this to resolve to a hidden host behind Cloudflare's edge network. And so then they generate a random, fully qualified domain. So I'll explain here in a little bit, just some random letters in front to make sure everything's unique. Then they build the phishing email. And so what happens is the security tools look, they see it's an ip6.arpa. So it presents the email. The victims never see that domain. It's all just in a hyperlink in email, right? So there's that image, they can click on it. It goes through Cloudflare's edge network. And so they're taken to an initial page that is hidden behind Cloudflare so you can't track it. And so you can't track down, and most of the times when they use a domain, you can track down registration information, look at infrastructure, things like that. But there is no real domain registered here. So you really can't go track it and look at some of the normal DNS stuff that we look at. So you get now. Before we published, we verified that this worked. So I set this up and I did it everything except the create SSL certificate because I'm not going to give my Cloudflare credentials to a shady Chinese website that says they're going to get an SSL certificate for you. But I was able to do everything else. In fact, I was able to do more. I set up DNS text records. I set up CNAMEs. I set up all sorts of things for this reverse DNS domain. To test it, I sent it to myself through email, and our security tool let the link go through. So it wasn't just kind of a one-off thing. It was, it looked like pretty significant hole. So I guess the takeaway is don't accept it. Don't click on an email link from me. So because I can send this apparently. Okay. Does anybody have any questions on the process here? I know I'm talking to a lot of DNS expert people, and so you
There's
may want to dig into it.
a couple of things in the chat which might be worth highlighting
Sure.
at this point then. So it's a good moment to pause, Brent. Probably the most important one from Alexi. Has Cloudflare done anything since your report was
Yes.
published to block
Yes,
this?
I've got a thing at the end that kind of talks about what we've done. So I don't want to steal my own thunder, but yes,
No,
they
no,
have.
no. That's good.
Okay.
And Michael, this is more a comment probably, I think, depends on users again not being shown correct information in an HTML email. So
Yes.
more a
Yes.
comment
So let me,
about using HTML emails
right.
poses challenges.
Yes. So I'm going to go back real quick before I get too far. This image is all victim C in the email because you can see this is the HTML here. It basically wraps this image in a link. And so that's all they see. Some of them may have a little tracking pixel in there, we found, but by and large, this is all the victim see. And one quick note, the image is, from somewhere else. This one was firearm stock. I saw Imager a lot. But notice the full of qualified domain is different for every single one of these. They randomly generate a different one, so you never see the same one, even in the same email. So it gets to that everyone is novel, and so you can't say this is the bad one. Now you can see the reverse DNS is the same, and we found that there were about 4 or 5 that were used repeatedly. But the random bit at the beginning is the one that kind of generates it.
But
So
presumably
again,
this could land on, this could be the front end to a traffic distribution system then.
it is.
Yeah.
They are. They are. So you're stealing my thunder.
Sorry,
So
you
no,
carry on. Carry
I'm
on.
joking. I'm joking. I'm joking. So again, I don't know that I need to explain too much about how reverse DNS works to this group. The interesting thing is since they have the entire /64, they don't do the entire reverse DNS of the IPv6 address. They just take the range and lop it off. And this whole part right here is what's set up as Cloudflare as the quote unquote domain. And then they prepend the random 10 letters in front of it. So they're not even using the full IP address because they get a /64.
And a question that's just popped in from Peter, just while you're on that slide.
Yeah,
Was the random part using a wildcard or were they all separate certs plus host names?
the cert is on the DDE part. So the second last line here. So that's the cert because that's what's set up in Cloudflare. And so what they do is when you set it up in Cloudflare, you set it up so it takes this part and it sets it as name server, and then they just ignore this random part that's prepended. You could use it because they're going to redirect to a domain. The domain could probably use it, but there's nothing we've seen that indicates it actually has any meaning or any content. It looks just random, again, to make sure that every single one is its own unique, fully qualified domain. There were other parts of the URL that encoded information. Some of it, and I think I've got it on the next slide. Um, but some of it we were able to decode a little bit of it and see there was some tracking information that you normally see with traffic distribution systems, malicious ad tech, things like that. But nothing we saw suggested that this was in any way meaningful other than just to make it unique.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. All right. So again, here's the email. These are the random parts, and you can see these paths in the URL are the things that encode information. There was one, and I can go back at another point in the very first email that there was a weird hex string that we were able to code, and that's we were able to get a little bit more detail on it and actually track a lot of it. So again, notice that they have different ones in each one. So I don't think I ever saw the same fully qualified domain repeated. It was just a new one every time. And so now when you do the DNSA query, it runs through and you can see here is where Cloudflare hits on that last part, and it gives two IP addresses, which are IP addresses that Cloudflare owns on their edge network. And so the domain is hiding back behind what's going on. So we did some other things, and we were able to figure out what that domain was through some trickery on our part, but we didn't publish it because we wanted to see, what happened and be able to track things afterwards. But it. We were amazed that it just worked. The browsers and everything just will accept the domain and run with it, even though that's not how it's intended to be used. So threat actors are great at finding ways to do things you didn't think were possible. So there was also some hijacked CNAMEs. So I told about it, and this was really interesting. And in fact, this was going to kind of be the main focus of the paper until we found the IPv6. So we found over 100 hijacked CNAMEs. I think last total is about 150. So these were government agencies, universities, telecom companies, media organizations, retailers, giant names that you would recognize. And so in that, there were some really interesting ones. The public notices sites.com expired. The threat actor got it. There are over 120 local newspapers in the US, like little small town newspapers that have a website, and there was a subdomain for public notices. They would use that website. And so by registering that one domain, the threat actor was able to hijack over 120 local newspapers just by that one. The domain hobsonsms.com provided account services for at least 3 universities, 3 that we were able to find. So like login information, things like that. So when they took that over, they were able to hijack 3 universities. And then this weird one served as CNAMEs for 2 global food and beverage companies. You would absolutely recognize that you're their name anywhere in the world. You probably have, been drinking one of their beverages or eating one of their snacks, in the past week or so. But it was a company that provided some services, usually for like a sweepstakes, something like that. When they got that, they got CNAMEs of 2 of the world's largest companies. Another one we found, there was a shadow domain. And so basically there is a entertainment company, shall we say, that we found this CDN6 dot whatever the company is .com, and it had been in operation since 2020. We never saw that it had been associated with anything legitimate with the company. It was just in these spams. And then we started poking around in DNS, and we found CDN 1 through 9. that doesn't look like they had ever been associated with anything legitimate with the company. And so someone got into their DNS records, set up a CDN 1 through 9, which looks like legitimate subdomains, right? Content delivery network. It's not uncommon to see that. And then got out and has just been abusing them for at least 6 years. Um, so yeah, so there was a lot in there. And so this is what we found. These are the lures. So I don't know if you have seen this sort of thing before, um, but I went through one of them. The one that I did was the a Thanksgiving meal from Costco. And so you go through the survey and it actually asks you like survey type questions. It ignores it all the time. There's a timer that's going on, right? So it's counting down. You only have so much time left. And so it adds that sense of urgency. There's random JavaScript that does a countdown. Oh, there's only three left. And it just wants you to enter in your credit card information. The thing that made it challenging is these lures are only active for about 48 hours. So if you go to it outside, you don't get in to see any of this. You get in to see there's a page that says basically it's asking for your email address. And that's the very first thing we found. And it took a long time to get past that. But we found thousands of domains that do that. And so basically there is this short window that you have to get past. And sometimes if it doesn't like your traffic, you won't even get past that. So, like on the IPv6 stuff, one thing that I found that worked really well is if it looked like I was using a mobile device from a residential IP address in the US. If I switched to a commercial IP address, it wouldn't let me through. And so there were lots of things in there to help keep security people out. We've seen evidence that this same phishing toolkit has been in use since 2017. I found the same lure just with some slightly updated text and time dates. So it's a very popular toolkit. It's out there all the time. Uh, Once someone clicks, it'll eventually get, you can see here this page to start the survey. And as you mentioned, it takes you through a traffic distribution system. So you can see here, there's the redirects that are kind of a telltale indicator that you're going through a traffic distribution system. And again, every step of the way of that traffic distribution system tries to analyze traffic and see if it's like a researcher or something like that you know, they don't want in there. And so we would frequently see things get kicked out to a blank page. So it would be a blank, it's HTTP 200, but there is no content. Or there was a very distinctive 404 page, or you would be kicked out to TikTok or Google or something else. And so it was very tricky to actually make it through and get into the malicious landing page. So for those of you who don't know what a traffic distribution system is, the idea is the victim will click on the phishing link, and then it gets sent into a network of computers that basically analyze the traffic and will redirect it based on real-time bidding for traffic and things like that. So I like to call traffic distributions threat delivery systems because we've seen malware, phishing scams, illegal content, all sort of stuff coming from there. And so they started out in legitimate ad tech, and then threat actors found them, and then it just they've been having fun with it for a very long time. Here's an example of that expired offer. So if you click on the link afterwards, which is what we were finding initially, it has a page like that basically says you're going to unsubscribe, which I don't think you're really going to unsubscribe. I think you're just going to get more of it. But that's the sort of page that we first saw, and we're kind of having trouble getting past that. So what? So, the idea here is ARPA abuse weaponizes infrastructure that's implicitly trusted. Um, at Infoblox, we do blocking, and so I had to do all kinds of checks. When I wanted to try and submit some of this stuff to our internal system, I was pestering VPs and saying, am I going to break anything? Because I don't want to be the one to break things for customers. And so you can imagine how challenging it is to, try and do some security on this because it is so implicitly trusted. Uh, because it bypasses the reputation, registration information, policy block lists, because no one wants to block ARPA. Um, we have only observed it used for phishing. We haven't observed it used for anything else. Uh, well, that's the only malicious one. There was some early usage we saw back in August of last year. I think there were some people in China using it to get around Great Firewall stuff. But that has largely died off because you have to get Cloudflare and there's a lot of other things you have to get through. So theoretically, we think it could work with IPv4 reverse DNS domains, but those are scarce, whereas the IPv6, you can get a lot of them. Uh, the big thing is next time it could be much worse, right? It was just phishing, but it could be worse. And I loved this when we posted this on Twitter. This was like one of the best comments ever. It says, so you're advanced enough to abuse ARPA, TLD, and IPv6 tunnels, but the actual phishing content you send is this. And that just summed it up. That I mean, it's you know, you can spot it. I guess they're very, it's still very popular because they make a lot of money because it's been around for 9 years. But it works. So here's the kind of the answer I alluded to. So what happened? So we were going to originally publish this earlier, but we tried to give notice to all the organizations. So we notified Cloudflare. I think their response when we first told them was, "No, that's not possible." And someone from our organization said, I'm looking at the DNS queries right here. We have done it. And so now they've altered their system. I think you can still set up and administer the reverse DNS, but it doesn't proxy and hide the IPs. So I guess that's part of it. We did look and we mentioned in the paper that we checked with some other providers um, to see if they had, they allowed the same sort of thing. So there were a couple that allowed us to do it. There were some that didn't, and they either explicitly denied it or their system failed when I tried to do it. So, we called both of those categories that it didn't work. So, but there were a few that it did work. We notified them. I haven't heard if they've done anything with that. So, in response to our publication, the actors changed their TDPs. Since publication, we haven't seen any more IP6.ARPA domains observed in spam. So we get some spam feeds. We haven't seen any of them. We've looked. The infrastructure no longer redirects to these scams. Now it's looks like it's just gambling and crypto stuff. So there's still some of the same front end. There's still the same traffic distribution system. It's just going to different content now. But the phishing toolkit is still alive and well. So these are three that you can see that it's all the same sort of thing. May 1st. So this is all within the last month that these are active. They're still going through traffic distribution systems. You can see here some different domains, some different infrastructure, but the tactics are still the same. So. Thank you. We've got our research. We can talk. I'm happy to answer questions. Again, this was, a deep dive rabbit hole that we went into. There's some more detail in our paper, but, we left some things out. I'm happy to talk about, some of the more nitty-gritty details and geek out with you guys if you have questions.
Brilliant. Thank you, Brent. A question in the chat from David. Have you seen arpa be the actual landing page or only the entry point to the TDS?
They were only entry points. So every single one of them, if it went to one of these successful phishing pages that we see here, yeah, this is a great one. So the ARPA domain was early here in the chain. And so if it was successful, it would go through a traffic distribution system and then land on a some other domain with the landing page. So that's why, in the beginning I was saying they're abusing the reputation. We think it was abusing the reputation for security systems because a normal user, like my parents get a phishing email, they're not gonna have any clue what .arpa is, right? And so the reputation means nothing to them, but it means everything to the security tools. And so that's what the threat actors are really abusing with respect to reputation. So in no case, hijack C names, anything. We never saw any correlation between the lure and the domain that was in the email. They were all separate, that, abusing different reputations for different audiences.
And I suppose you sort of implied this, but an obvious question. I guess if I'm an Infoblox user, this would now be defeated by your software,
So
hopefully.
we blocked the traffic distribution domains, so the ones here kind of in the middle, and we blocked the phishing domains. Um, because of ARPA obviously is very touchy. We added the IP6.ARPA domains that we saw to our informational feed so it can be logged.
Yeah,
And then a client, our customers can decide what they want to do with that, but we didn't want to like start blocking ARPA because bad things happen. So
yeah, perfect. Okay, oh, because I think it follows on, I'll come to David's question in the chat, and then Peter's got his hand raised, and then I've put myself in the queue. So in that order, because I think it follows on, David has commented, so defenders do have or had other opportunities to catch the threat, especially if using protective DNS, which I think,
yes.
yeah,
Yes. And so again, this gets back to, the traffic distribution systems, things like that, that if you're able to track and identify those, then you can, stop the victims from ever getting to the malicious landing pages, things like that. At one point, another researcher I was talking to, there's a threat actor we've been tracking. They have thousands and thousands of domains, um, you know, over 50,000, I think, even early on. And he said, if you know the right 60 to block, you can shut down the entire TDS because those are the ones that manage all and coordinate things. So yes, so there's a lot of other opportunities. Um, the landing pages, there's a lot of abused services in here. I was looking, this past week just to get updated information, and I see, Google storage being abused all over the place on there as the entry point. So obviously it's tough to block that. And so fortunately, because they use a traffic distribution system, if you know what to look for, there's lots of other opportunities to block. Yes.
great. Peter,
Thanks. First of all, this is so cool. So thank you so much
My
for
pleasure.
telling us about it. It's really interesting, and sometimes I wish I was a criminal, just so I could come up with cool things like this to all day long. I mean, it's really interesting and kind of clever, I have to say. Um, but my question was that, it's kind of like David's question. Like, what's to stop people just setting up a vhost with a .arpa uh, uh, as the actual host? Because it seems to me like the problem is actually the delivery of the phishing. Like the phishing kit hasn't changed, right? So I assume it's still basically effective. So the problem is getting it through to people.
Right.
And so couldn't you just set up a vhost without all the complicated Carfair stuff? Um, that just shows
So
the phishing
again,
rates.
we're probably getting into a lot of the deep arcane DNS stuff that's out of my expertise, and so I don't want to wade too much into that. But I think a lot of this, so it gets back to Hurricane Electric is responsible for the IPs in this range, and they got the IPs from from them. So now, if you want to get the IP6 tunnel, and instead of going through Cloudflare, go your own, you could do that. I think one of the things, from a threat actor perspective, it creates more of a trail.
Right. Okay.
And
Okay.
I think the big thing with Cloudflare, and we sometimes joke that we call it crime flare, is that it hides so much
That's mean.
that that's what makes it really popular with the threat actors. And
Okay.
so the combination of the IPv6 tunnel and Cloudflare means that they are hiding everything, right? So
Yeah.
we can't use any of our normal DNS tricks to start trying to find infrastructure, because the only piece we have is Hurricane Electric and Cloudflare. And so, fortunately for us, when we looked at it, you can see this reverse DNS here. There, like I said, there were only about 4 or 5 variations
Yeah.
in IPs that they used. A couple of them were different tunnels. Some were the same tunnel and just different levels of detail. And so, since there were relatively few, we were able to block those and track them fairly well. But again, we you have to know that that's it's out there
Mm.
and that they're doing bad things. And because most of the time, you know, people don't think to block.arpa because you can't use it for these things, right? You can't use it for these things. And so I think it was flying under the radar, and then coupled with Cloudflare.
Cool. Thank you.
I don't
So
know if that was sufficient answer, but
Yeah, kind of. I still think it would be possible to set up like a vhost on like a rented VPS or something with
yeah.
the actual host name as being that. I'm not sure about getting an SSL certificate for it, but you say it's possible with some dodgy Chinese issuers. Um, and I think if they decoupled it from Cloudflare, you could still sort of get a lot of the benefit of what was happening here without being a bit more tricky to block it as well. That sort of was good, but I think I get
Okay.
what you were saying. Like, yeah,
Yeah. And Dave also works with me at Infoblox, and he's the one we were hunting on this together. So he's got a comment that may address and answer more of your questions. So
yeah,
um, yeah,
yeah. Thanks.
yeah, thank you.
So let me give 2 public service announcements in my comment. Firstly, for anyone watching the recording, sometimes I wish I was a criminal is not the response we were hoping for by sharing this, just for clarity. Also, for my friends in Interpol, I think Split might be a good place for you to head for sometime soon. But
Come on. Easy.
more seriously, interestingly, at the ICANN contracted parties meeting last week, there was a presentation from one of the office of the CTO team, Sean Lloyd, on parked domains, which was also being used to front traffic distribution systems. So I recommend sort of looking out for that presentation. I'm sure the recordings will be available by now. But if you like another route in to the TDS, using a sort of a different front door, but yeah, just emphasises the value that sort of malicious parties are getting from traffic distribution systems, which is quite alarming. They're very creative.
I forgot to mention one quick note. We have a public GitHub repo, and we've posted a number of the indicators from this research there. Some of the traffic distribution systems and landing pages, so you can go have fun with that and start hunting if you want to. So not everything's in there, but there's a good chunk. There's a few thousand. So
Brilliant. Thank you. Of course, just to really alarm everyone, it's worth bearing in mind if you front this with an agentic AI element, it can easily create almost an infinite number of variations into the sort of TDS, which is not a positive thought, given they're increasingly being used, as we'll see in a little while. Brilliant. Right. Anyone else with any comments or questions on this really excellent and informative presentation? Not seeing any more at the moment.
Thank you. And if you guys have questions afterwards, feel free to reach out to us. So happy to talk about stuff.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for that, Brent and colleagues. As you said, always amazing the really good stuff that comes out the threat intel team, and is synthesized down into usually quite a punchy report. So yeah, excellent work. Thank you for coming on and sharing that. Okay, right. Let's then just briefly move on. So I reshare my slides. Okay, less DNS specific stuff this week, but having said that, at the back end of last week, the new generic TLD round kicked off with ICANN, the first time since 2012, so 14 years in the making. So if you fancy getting yourself your own custom GTLD, now's your chance to put in your application. You need roughly $250,000 for the application fee and probably some professional advice fees as well. So it's a non-trivial amount to participate, but it doesn't happen very often. Yeah, and I think that runs through, I can't remember the exact dates, was it sometime at the end of August or thereabouts, and then there's a whole deliberation once the applications are in. I think last time around about 2,000 successful applications came out the other end of the machinery, so it'll be interesting to see what happens this time round. Also, another announcement about an agentic AI-linked DNS identity standard for AI agents. There's quite a lot of stuff happening in this space. You may recall from a couple of weeks or so ago, Google made an announcement which they presented in Manchester last week, and they're sort of intending to go down the standard route for that. So it soon to appear, I suspect, at the ITF. Identity Digital's variant is DNS ID. And as people will be aware, it's a topic we're going to come on to on the weekly call in a few weeks' time. I was going to get Google on, as well as Jim Mosley from Infoblox, who's got a sort of a discovery proposal in the same space, and I'll naturally see if Identity Digital can take part as well. If you've got any suggestions for anyone else, do let me know, but we'll sort out a date in the next few weeks for that discussion. And speaking of, I mentioned the ICANN Contracted Parties Summit a few times. During the panel session that Michael Pelage, who many of you will know, is often on this call, hosted, Francisco Arias, one of the VPs at ICANN, mentioned that ICANN will be forming a new technical study group to look at the implications for integrating sort of a GTLD with the same name in an alternative naming space. So some form of DNS and sort of a blockchain-based naming system, sort of Web3 integration, details of which to be determined depending on the outcome of that study group. But that was announced, as I say, a short while ago. Sorry, last week rather, by ICANN. And I think there's probably one other thing I was going to highlight. Oh yes, since I agree with this, and I've said it many times, I thought it was worth mentioning. I was very pleased to see an article by Nick Lewis in How to Geek, just reminding everyone that you shouldn't really use Quad 1 as your default resolver. If you're using any of the Cloudflare family of resolvers, it should be 1112, because that does at least block domains for to read from my own sort of post. Phishing, C2, malware, and other kinds of malicious activity. So in my view, that's really what Quad 1 should have been, but here we are. And obviously other open resolvers are available. Quad 9 does do that by default on Quad 9. And as does DNS for EU with a slightly less snappy 86.54.11.1. Again, that's its sort of first of its sequence of resolvers. Many others are available. And then there was a whole bunch of non-DNS stuff that caught my eye. We won't go through all of these, it'll take far too long, but just briefly, amongst other things, further stuff on the age verification app within the EU, which the Commission announced, I think, a couple of weeks ago, and they're encouraging member states to roll out. Something which came out of it, NCSC, but it could have equally come from other places, which is everyone needs to prepare for a vulnerability patch wave. So effectively expect a tsunami of patches heading the way of enterprises starting now. And that's going to sort of stress the system, but I think it seems to be inevitable. And then sort of talk about TDSs and other sort of malicious activity. There's quite a very professional sort of a malware as a service toolkit, Blue Kit, which now inevitably includes an AI assistant and 40 templates to make it really easy to get your malware up and running with minimal effort or knowledge on your part, which is quite scary. And an interesting piece in Bleeping Computer on that. Yeah, and more stuff about again, threats to cybersecurity on enterprises, which is agentic AI is being adopted really fast and it's not being checked properly. So, quotes, it's a disaster waiting to happen. And that was pretty much the sense of some of the sessions at the RSA conference earlier this year as well, that if it's implemented without due diligence, which it largely is being implemented at the moment, without due diligence, then it's a security nightmare. Thankfully, some of the security agencies have put out some guidelines on how to at least avoid some of those problems. Yeah, a couple of other things about the adoption of IPv6, etc., but we're running out of time, so you can read those at your leisure. So lots of really interesting stuff this week. Terms of impending deadlines, if you want to go to the next NANOG, the deadline for standard registration rates is today, so you need to register today, otherwise the rates will go up. Also, a couple of others coming up. Nog.fi, the deadline for presentations is next Monday, so that's coming up pretty soon if you want to present there. And also, it's not that far off the deadline for registrations for OARC 46. And when I looked at the numbers earlier today, they were looking pretty healthy. I think it was over 600 in person in Edinburgh for that. And also for OARC 46, which is taking place the weekend immediately before the start of sorry, that's mixing them up. OARC is 155 in-person attendees, apologies for that, and then RIPE, which follows afterwards, mixing them up, sort of 600 odd, I think, as well. So it should be a good crowd in Edinburgh for those two events, which is good to see. And yeah, there's a load of things happening, including this week. On Wednesday, Infoblox, our friends there got that sort of session on the DNS security guide, which I think Ross and Cricket are participating in, if I remember rightly. So that's good to see. Register for that now if you haven't already done so. Also, the Centre Jamboree is taking place Wednesday through Friday. And on Thursday session, I think that may have been I wouldn't swear to it, about decryption at scale for TLS 1.3 quick and PQC as well. So loads of interesting things this week and onwards, and it's not that long now, a couple of weeks to OARC 46 and RIPE 92 as well in Edinburgh, which we talked about at the start of the call. A few of us will be there. This time next week, we'll talk about the agenda of those two meetings, and then we'll be meeting in person. Well, those of us attending, we'll do this call It'll be hybrid, so in person if you're in Edinburgh. Obviously, we're broadcast from there. John Todd will be talking about some recent developments at Quad 9. And then no doubt we'll retire somewhere for a drink or so afterwards. So definitely find us in Edinburgh in person if you're there. I think that was everything from me. So let me stop sharing my screen with 3 minutes to go and see if anyone's got anything else you wanted to mention. So anything else on anyone's minds or any other comments or questions? If there is, pop it in the chat or just unmute and talk, whichever's easier. Peter's just heading off to start his new his new criminal enterprise, perhaps. Oh, is that sirens I can hear in the background behind you, Peter?
I think there could be something in it.
Yeah.
If Brent is still here, I'm just went through your article. So it sounds to me like there is no legitimate reason why there should ever be a DNS type A query for something that ends in IP6.arpa anyway. So is there not an approach to simply block A queries for anything in an IP6.arpa?
That was our thought as well. So it's making sure. So for example, in our product, one of the questions was, and I can't speak for anybody else's, but making sure that when we put it, if I were to add it to a block list, that it would only affect A queries. That's just the concern. And so, I think that is, from our standpoint, that's a question that we have asked of our product engineering team, because again, I don't want to try it and have it not work because again, bad things happen. But yes, there's no legitimate reason that should be in an A query. There's no legitimate reason it should be in an email, as a hyperlink, that sort of thing. Correct.
Got it. We're on the same page then. Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess with that sort of health check that you don't want to be the company that broke ARPA, which, is going to be tricky. Alexei.
I just wanted to add to that a lot of authoritative name servers will refuse to serve a reverse zone that has A records. So that's not what David was asking, but there are even measures to prevent it from working on the authoritative side.
Yeah. But it does underline how creative some of the bad actors out there. And wouldn't it be great if they turned that talent to more useful things? But there we are. Brilliant. Well, look, we're just on the hour. So thank you, Brent, for a really interesting presentation. Very much appreciated. I certainly think there's a lot of food for thought there. I'm sure that's going to trigger a lot of people scratching heads post-call. So really good. Thank you for that. And otherwise, have a fantastic week, everyone. And look forward to sort of catching up this time next week when, as I said earlier, we'll talk about what's on the agenda for the OARC 46 and Right 92 meetings kicking off in 2 weeks' time. So see you all next Monday. Bye, everyone.